This is Lois Whaley for Women Today and Yesterday. My guest today is Sally Delgado, who is a curator at the Kennedy Museum, I believe. Sally, right?
Right, I'm the curator of education. Yes.
Curator of education. So that means you work especially with groups that come through?
Correct, yes.
Yeah. How long have you been there at Kennedy?
Oh my, I have been there, I believe I am going on 20 years now.
20 years?
Yeah.
My goodness.
Yeah.
You must have started right about the time they opened.
I actually started before they opened the museum.
Oh, really?
We ran some outreach programs out in the community, so I was hired to help run those. And then the position just kind of grew after that.
My goodness. So you're the old-timer on the spot.
I am. I'm the old-timer. As our director says, I'm the history of the place.
Well, it's particularly nice to talk to you about Kennedy Museum since you know so much about the history. And I noticed that you brought a very interesting book. This is fairly new, I believe.
This one?
The history of Lynn Hall.
Well, actually, this is a project that one of our students, we do a lot of work with students at the museum.
Yes.
So a student was really, really enamored with the building a few years ago. And he decided that he was going to go around and look for, we had a lot of the historic images, and he was going to go around and look for the current places. So that's what a lot of this binder is. We get a lot of visitors that are really, really interested in the history of the building.
Yes, that's right. And so you have a traditional picture maybe from 1900.
Right.
And then a more modern picture.
Correct.
Just taken a year or two ago.
Yeah.
Probably. Right. Well, it is very interesting. And also in the back there are a number of newspaper stories.
Right.
About well, they were basically about the days when it was the mental health facility. And
we tried to select some of the articles that would speak to a lot of the questions that we get. Because, there's a lot of misinformation out there, of course.
and sort of mysterious things. I mean, people seem to be very set on finding out more about the unfortunate woman who died in the building, and she had disappeared from the ward or whatever, and they didn't find her for a couple of months.
Quite a while, right. So we always tell people, well, yeah, that is a true story, but keep in mind that she was someone's relative, so it's not like, it's not open to the public, it's not a...
Yes,
it's not a place to visit, really.
Right. Because those very long wings, which you can see, across the river from the university campus, really, basically, you see what a really large building it is.
Yeah.
But they have the interesting thing I thought was that it was built with individual rooms, and each person had a window.
Right.
So it was very modern for its day in 1868, I believe, when it was built.
That is correct. It was built on something called the Kirkbride Plan. So if you have an aerial view of it, it's that main administration building, which is what the museum is now, and then the wings that kind of branch off like that.
Yes.
And one side was for men and one side was for women.
Right.
So I should probably mention, too, that getting all of these images and articles was a collaboration with Alden Library. And we continue to collaborate with them. In fact, there's going to be a small exhibition opening if you come in the front entrance of the museum immediately to the right, that small gallery will now be a permanent installation dedicated to the history of the building.
Oh, really?
That's really nice, yeah. That should go up in the next month or so.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So this coming year, actually, it will be in place.
Right.
I notice right now that it has one of the quilts.
Right. The quilt exhibition is kind of nicely spread throughout the museum. We have some of them on the first floor, some on the second floor, and then that one in that one space.
The one in the very front.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I was kind of surprised by it. I guess the last time I looked in there, there was, you know, something totally different.
Right.
And but it really is interesting. And the difference in the names. I mean, this is Lynn Hall, which is named for the former Dean of Fine Arts.
Right, Dean
Henry Lynn.
Lynn, who
Yes.
Was Maya Lynn's father.
Yes. Well, I knew Maya. Maya was in the same high school class as my older son.
Yeah.
And so actually they had gone through school together since third grade, I guess it was, or
So they were
whatever.
classmates, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and of course she's become such a famous artist. And we have the Lynn installation down by Walter Hall. And
Yeah, the one called Input. Yeah.
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 the so-called computer card.
Right, like the little chips that were the old computer cards.
The old computer cards. Well, when I first took computer science, that's what we had. I can remember the days when you had to get 79 correct punches or else you had to start all over again. And it was a marvelous technological advance when they were able to go all the way to where you'd made a mistake, you know, like the first 60 punches, if they were okay.
Right. One of the things that I really love about that piece is that it was a collaboration with her brother as well,
Yes,
who's a poet.
right.
So if you really walk through that space, you know, there's the writing, there's the poem that's written on the interior portions of those kind of indentations.
Right, some are down and some are up.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And depending on which way you walk, you know, you get the text in a different
Right.
format.
I remember telling Mrs. Lynn once, or writing her a note or something like that, in which I mentioned that girls were sunbathing on some of those
Right.
raised pieces, and I think she thought that was rather fun. Haven't seen anyone doing that lately. Maybe they are more cautious now, I don't know. But anyway, we're having this, quilts is very interesting that there are these quilts at Lynn Hall, the Kennedy Museum. And I believe they are, here is what has Quilt National on one side, and on the other side, Earth Stories, which is the name of the set of quilts there at Kennedy.
Right.
And there are about 24, I would say.
Something like that, yeah. This was a deliberate collaboration between our former curator and the Dairy Barn to have quilts in both spaces. You know, the summertime is not really our highest traffic time at the Kennedy Museum, but it definitely is, you know, for the Dairy Barn with the Quilt National. So the idea of having these quilts on display at the Kennedy has really brought a lot of visitation to the museum. Yeah.
Right, and since the Dairy Barn is right up the road, since it was part of the original
That's right.
mental health center.
That's right. Yeah.
At one time, there were even 3 large dairy barns with famous cows, you know, that gave lots and lots of milk and so on. And it's celebrating its 100th anniversary of the barn that has become the museum for the Dairy Barn quilt show. So I think maybe we have a couple of pictures from the quilts that are in the Earth Stories group. Maybe if we could see those now. Can we see those now?
Okay, so the one you're showing is the one that's...
The one that's shown there is the one that actually references Ohio.
Right. So it references Muddy Fork Farm. It's one of the pieces that we've used quite a bit with our school visits. since it has that Ohio connection. So
The Ohio connection.
We can meet an academic content standard that way. And we should probably say that these quilts are from the Studio Art Quilt Associates. And one of the really nice things about this grouping of quilts that you mentioned, that the title was Earth Stories, is that they have this common theme.
Yeah.
So that they're all
Earth Stories, but quite different. Quite different quilts. For instance, there's that one that has a traditional quilt in it, and it's been changed into a historic art piece.
Right. Right, because this group is really dedicated to the notion of the quilt as an art object. It was interesting. We met with someone from that organization just sometime during the summer, and we were having this conversation of whether the artists like to be called quilters, artists, craftsperson, that whole, get into that whole mess of what people think about when they think about the word craft. So that's was an interesting discussion to have.
Yes, and this is a second picture from that Earth Stories exhibit, which there are 24, all very interesting. And, one more reason why people should come and see right away, because the quilts will be going off, I believe, on Labor Day.
I believe that it's up through September 6th.
And
then
Labor Day. Yeah. So if you want to see these Art Guild, did you say?
The Studio Art Quilt Associates.
Art Quilts Associates, Earth Stories exhibit, like for the Dairy Barn, you need to do it now.
Right. That's a good plug. Thank you.
It's just about over. And there are these wonderful quilts. The one that we saw, I thought was interesting with the windmills.
Right, and that was by Cynthia St. Charles from Billings, Montana.
From Montana. And it's interesting that she sort of complains about it because in the interests of renewable energy, these windmills have been moving into places like Montana and spoiling the view.
Spoiling the view is part of her artist statement.
Yes. So, but that's interesting. Not only does it show above ground the windmills, but also below ground the fossils.
Fossil fuels, exactly.
The fossils that have made fossil fuel.
Right.
Which of course is the less renewable kind of energy that we are depending so much upon, and which is sending up carbon dioxide.
Right. And so this has been a really good one to have discussions about, what's happening in Ohio as well,
yes,
in our local area.
Right, yeah.
So it's one that visitors can definitely relate to. And one of the things I also like about it is that there's a lot of that text in it, that it's very, you couldn't see that in what we were looking at on screen. But this piece is honoring an organization called procon.org. So the text in this piece goes through all the pros and cons of the different
pros
forms.
and cons of
different
various forms of energy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Like the con of the windmills is the spoiling of views.
Spoiling of view.
But the pro is the fact that it is taking this renewable resource caused by the sun, namely the wind,
Yeah.
to capture its energy. When I was a girl growing up out west, I used to see traditional windmills. And the traditional windmills were to pump water, essentially. I mean, the windmill would spin and then they could pump the water out of a well.
Right.
And
Where did you grow up?
that was long ago.
Yeah. Where did you grow up?
In Nevada. High desert. Yeah. It's unusual but beautiful in its own way. One year I took a long drive, about 180 miles, and there was, I think, maybe 2 gas stations in the whole
trajectory.
The whole thing. Yeah. So what I saw was all the hills. There are many, many mountains across Nevada because of the way the geology works. there would be uplift and down, and so you have these ranges which run north and south across Nevada. You can notice that from the air if you fly over too. But and the hills are quite different because it depends on what is showing, what the earth is like there. Sometimes it's red, sometimes it's black, sometimes it's just kind of yellowish, you know, and like I say, it has its own beauty.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, what about you? Where did you grow up?
Well, I was born in Puerto Rico, and then I grew up between the southern part of the United States and Mexico for a while.
Oh,
And then as a teenager, I was in Puerto Rico, back in Puerto Rico.
Back in Puerto Rico. Why were your parents there? Were they Puerto Rican?
No, my parents actually met in Puerto Rico. They were both teaching at a Methodist-related school. They were working for the Methodist Church. So they were both working at a private school in Puerto Rico, met there, got married, went back. I was born, we left when I was about 3 months old, but then my dad had the opportunity to return to as a professor in the seminary there. So they had a theological seminary that crosses different religious areas. So he taught there for 6 years from the time I was 12 to 18.
Oh, yeah. So that was rather different. Are you, do you speak Spanish?
I do, and I actually married a man from Puerto
Delgado.
Rico. Yeah, so,
Yeah.
and I do use his name.
Yes,
so.
it's obviously a Spanish name. Well, I have certain connections because my parents lived in Mexico. This was before I was born, okay? But in the 1920s, so it was just at the end, just after the Civil War they had in Mexico that was, you know, sort of a fantastic event with different people coming to, I mean, like Zapata, you know, and disappearing, maybe assassinated, you know, and so on. But they were there in the 1920s, and I was born in the 1930s in New York City, where they were at the time. But like you, as a baby, before I even could walk, we moved to Nevada, so I was raised there. And then my husband is a specialist on the Spanish Civil War. He's written a book on the German intervention in Spain, Hitler sending aid to Franco during the Civil War there in the late 1930s. Yeah. Which was a time that he remembers from his boyhood because they had collectibles that were war cards that came out in the late 30s. And they had a whole bunch on the Japanese-Chinese War, which started in 1937. And then the next year, in 38, they did a series on Spain. So as a boy, you know,
He collected?
8 years old, he was collecting these war cards. And
he still has them, I assume.
yeah, it's kind of a specialty. Nowadays, it's mostly baseball cards. Less warlike things, but still. Yeah, so that's interesting, your background in Puerto Rico and so on. Does that make a difference in the way you see some of the art that comes in?
That's an interesting question. I guess one of the things that's been most educational for me in the work in the museum and how I see things, and maybe my background helps me with this, I'm not sure, but is the work with the Navajo collection.
Oh, yes, right.
Because we've, you know, that, of course, none of us are Navajo, and none of us are experts on the Navajo material, but we have had the good fortune of having various grant opportunities to travel to bring people here and to travel out there.
Oh yes, the
And
connections.
And I think
Well,
that ability to see, a diversity
right.
of ideas and multiple viewpoints is good.
And that brings us really to the name of Kennedy, because that's our Kennedy, our Ohio University Kennedy, Edwin Kennedy.
Yep, Edwin L. and Ruth E. Kennedy.
Yes, for whom because his collection of artifacts, many Navajo rugs, for instance.
Right. We have almost, I believe it's almost 700 textiles, and most of them are Navajo.
700 textiles.
It's an amazing collection. It's a collection that really rivals any Navajo weaving collection.
Yes.
And because it covers the whole range from the historic pieces, like it has a first phase, what's called a first phase Ute chief blanket, although the word chief is somewhat of a misnomer because the Navajo did not have chiefs. It really referred to the high value, the high status of that as a trade item with other groups.
Yes.
So we have a representation of that phase all the way to 21st century pieces that have been added.
I have a couple of ancient Navajo rugs moldering away in our house.
You may have to bring them by.
Well, one of them is quite interesting. I've always kind of wondered when it might have been made. I think it was probably dated from about 1900. But it's all, it doesn't have any red in it.
Okay.
It's all, the natural, either white or brown or black.
Is it just stripes, or is it?
Well,
does
it has a pattern. It does have a pattern, and it also has. This was pointed out by the elderly gentleman that sold it to us in 1957. Like eons ago, and that he had gotten it himself when he was out west sometime, maybe 1920 or thereabouts, but it was already old then.
Wow.
And but it has a break in the pattern, and he said that was traditional, to have a break in the pattern because it represented that the spirit of the rug.
I know what you're talking about. It has a piece that comes out to the edge, right?
Well, it has. There is one spot where there's a break in the pattern.
Okay.
And
we're getting ready to install. My area, I work a lot with university students, and our area has been working on a small exhibit of some of the smaller weavings that are called Two Gray Hills weavings. It's a regional design, and they are very finely woven. And all of them have somewhat of basically a black border, and then a little line that comes out that is the spirit line. And there's different interpretations as to what that means for different families.
Yeah. Well, that was his idea. I guess that was what was told him by the trader who sold him the rug back about 1920.
And it's interesting that you mentioned traders because, so much, I guess I would say that probably all of Kennedy's collection was acquired through work with traders or dealers. And one of the things that I think the Kennedy Museum has done to make really kind of great strides is to work directly with some of the artists now. So we're paying them directly for recent acquisitions.
Well, I have another thing that I must mention that because it's such fun, really. I was down in the Southwest. My husband went to Los Alamos, actually, to a forum that was talking about nuclear energy during the Second World War and so on. And so I had some time, and I took a drive across New Mexico and Arizona and stopped at one of those places. And they had this darling thing, which I'm sure, there are many of around, but I had never seen anything like it. It's like a toy. It shows a woman making a rug. And she's got a baby in a cradle board, about this big.
Is it about this tall?
Yeah, about this high.
I think I have one.
You have one?
I think I inherited it from, I don't know, it was in the collection. It was probably Kennedy's, and so it's kind of, we have an education collection.
I see.
And that's what, and ours is about About that
Yeah,
high.
it's about that high.
Yeah.
But you can see, I mean, they've used a natural forked branch
Yeah, for the loom.
for the loom, to put the loom on. And the rug is about half done.
Yeah, yeah.
And she's wearing, you know, the Navajo long dress and so on.
Right, right.
And so on. I couldn't resist it. We'll have to
Compare.
show
Yeah,
compare.
we'll have to do show and tell.
Show and tell on the Navajo doll, the Navajo dolls. But I was noticing that at the front of the building, where of course there is now the cafe,
Right.
since Kennedy is the only, is it the only museum that's attached to a cafe, or the only
think that's the
cafe
line.
that's attached to a museum?
Something like that, at least in our area.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
And they have many books, number of books for
Right.
sale there that are traditional books, either of exhibits that have been at Kennedy, but I noticed that among the other things, they had a biography of Edwin Kennedy.
Yes, and that was published at OU.
Yes, yes. Several of those books are Ohio University Press.
Right.
They also have paperback editions of the history done by Betty Hollow, the 200th, you know, the bicentennial
Yes,
of OU,
that's right.
for sale there.
And there's also the book by Catherine Ziff,
Yes.
called Asylum on the Hill, that deals
Right,
with the
which
history.
Gives the history of the mental health center that was originally the Lunatic Asylum.
Right, that was its first name. Yeah,
Yeah,
the Athens Lunatic
long ago.
Asylum, long ago.
We came to Athens in 1964, and I do remember visiting up at the mental health center at one time. In fact, I was trying the other day to figure out how one, I guess nowadays you can't really get into the wings.
Right. Well, one side, if you're facing the museum to the left, they are using some of those as graduate art studios. But you're right, it's not just open to the public.
Right,
so.
right. But so I was trying to, you know, I remembered being in that place, and when I saw the picture, you know, in the
Of the
Lynn
binder.
history, I recognized that must have been in the woman's side, that there was a long, you know, sort of living room kind of place where the people who lived there could gather during the daytime or whatever, and that must have been where I visited that one time.
Yeah. And there is a space it's called the old ballroom, that was like an activity
Yes.
room. I don't know if was that
I've seen
still
a lot of
the
pictures
old
of
one?
it,
Okay.
but in fact, one of the things it mentions in there is that the ceiling of the ballroom had pictures painted on it or something.
It was the edging around the top.
Oh, I
had,
see.
What looked like hand painting.
Right.
So right now, if you know, there's a floor now. You can't tell that it was a two-story room, but it did cover the second floor and all the way up, you know, through the third floor and up to the top. So if you're currently now on the third floor and crawl around in some closets, you can tell what
You
the
can see it.
ceiling.
I
looked
suppose
like.
that's where you store many of your.
Well, we've the ballroom has had other construction done in it over the years. So when you walk into the space that you can see of the current ballroom, you don't really have that sense of what it used to be. We would love for that to be the next renovation in that space, would be to open that up. We are currently undergoing work for a new HVAC system. So they are moving a lot of the collections down into a single area, what used to be called, or we still call it the milk parlor, so I guess it was the old milk parlor for the building. But it's kind of one of those side, almost like appendage buildings. So all of the collections, except for the Southwest Native American, will be moved down into that area within the next year, I believe. And it'll be a vault. It'll be a secure vault.
Right. Well, things change.
Yeah. So then we could open up that ballroom, maybe.
Right, that would be nice.
It would.
Yeah. I was noticing, for instance, in the cafe space, one of the rooms, I think the sort of the dining room part where there are tables for people who've purchased like a salad or something in the cafe to sit. And they have pictures around.
Some of the historic pictures.
Some of the historic pictures.
Yeah, one of those, I don't know if you noticed, is of the little crocodile or alligator that used to live in the fountain that used to be in front of the space.
Yes.
And I've had people come in over the course of years and say, as when they were children, they remembered coming up to the grounds, like on field trips or something like that, just to look at the
crocodile.
Yeah, the little,
or alligator, as the case may be.
Yeah, I'm not sure which it was.
I think maybe we have alligators and the Egyptians have crocodiles, or something like that, you know. Yeah, it's interesting, but it's a very interesting building. And of course, there are other parts of the ridges which have been turned into, like the Voinovich School is just next door.
Right.
Isn't it? Yeah.
Right. And the university is currently looking, I mean, there's a Ridges kind of master planning committee. There's a lot of work that's being done considering not only the buildings, but the green spaces up there as well.
Well, you know, I remember, again, another visit up there, quite different this time. It was after the mental health center had closed and had been closed for a while, and a number of the buildings had been closed. And I was working with some of the people from the extension department, and they were thinking of moving up there. So we went into the building, which I think originally had really astronomy connections, but which has now been rehabilitated and is a meeting space where they sometimes have plays and music.
Oh, like the Ridges Auditorium space.
Yeah,
yeah, that's a beautiful little building.
Right. Well, I remember being there when it was pretty well, you know, parts of it falling down and that sort of thing, and that was kind of the idea, what could be done with a building like that. And it's very nice that they have rehabilitated it in such a way that that
I believe
happens.
it is still under the College of Fine Arts. Yeah, I believe they're the ones that schedule the use of it. Yeah, which we are also a part of. The museum is formerly part of the college.
Yes, of course. So you've seen many exhibits over the years. You mentioned the Navajo collection, and of course, being from the West, I'm a big
I noticed your turquoise earrings. Those are beautiful.
And in fact, I got my earrings at one of the sales.
Great.
Which they have maybe twice a year now.
Yeah, we
right?
do them twice a year now. Those sales are sponsored, or by the Friends of the Museum.
Friends of the Museum.
With White's Mill, with Meg Toomey and her family from White's Mill. And they do them usually in May for the, what is it? Well, no, Mom's Weekend.
Mom's Weekend.
That's not May anymore, I don't think. The university's May, or the university's Mom's
true.
Weekend.
I mean, May is knocked out of the calendar.
Yeah,
really.
so I'm not sure if we changed it then to April. Or,
probably so.
And then again in December, early December.
Yeah, I got these earrings at one of those events 20 years ago or something like that, quite some time ago. Maybe they weren't even having them 20 years ago, but I've had them for quite a while. And
well, it used to be Trissolini Gallery used to run a shop, I believe.
They did.
Yeah, before I moved here in 1991, and I don't remember if they were. I think they were still doing that.
Oh yes,
then, right?
I would think so. In 1991, I remember Tony Trissolini. I knew his wife Margaret quite well, and They were wonderful people, you know, but it was one of those very strange things. In fact, we had been away that year. My husband had his first sabbatical in 1970, which was the year that the university closed because of Kent State.
Right.
And closed in mid-May and didn't open again until September. But in the meanwhile, Tony had been named Dean of the College of Fine Arts. And it was a very strange thing. He walked up the top of that hill near where you turn to go up Rock Riffle. You know, there's quite a hill there. And he walked up to the top and he died. And they later learned that his brother had also passed away at a relatively young age, you know, like in his 40s.
Was it
sort
like
of
a
similar,
heart
like
attack,
like a heart attack.
Wow.
And very, very strange and sad.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that was once the president's home, the Trissolini house now, and the gallery was named for Tony.
And the group that was called Friends of Trissolini, I know they ran the shop, they became Friends of the Kennedy Museum when the museum was established. So.
Right, and they've been so active over the years. One of the people who did exhibits, and I remember one time you had an exhibit out, I think it was about a year ago, but it had a piece by Ann Culbert in it. And she was a very interesting artist.
I did meet her, and actually when she passed away and her collection was given to the museum, I remember going out to her home with the director to get those pieces. Yeah, that was part of, it was a 3-part exhibition over the course of 3 years that we worked with Jenny Klein from the art history department at the School of Art. So she was curating from the collection exhibitions that had to do with the women in our collections, and she was doing it in somewhat of a chronological fashion. But she also wanted to include, and of course Ann Culbert is in the collection, and she wanted to, there was a special kind of focus on the more local, with her and Bernarda Bryson-Shawn. We also have some pieces of hers. Yeah, her pieces are really quirky.
Right. Well, I was noticing in one of the other exhibits that is there, a piece by another locally connected artist, Jenny Holzer.
Right.
Of the Holzer family.
Of the Holzer, medical fame.
Yes, she was a student here in the 1970s.
Yes, she got her BFA or BA in Fine Arts, I don't know which it was, in the 70s. And then, of course, has become, internationally famous.
Yes, very, very interesting because she specializes in pithy statements.
Those are called truisms.
Truisms.
Truisms. So the piece that's on exhibit right now is just one of the series of truisms. It's a whole alphabetical list.
Yes, it's the last part of the alphabet, I believe.
I didn't remember which one
was
up.
Yeah, I think it's W through Z or something like that. T through Z, whatever. But
and that's something that she started doing that shortly after graduating in New York City. The first truisms were just things that she posted around the city. That exhibit is called Art as Information, so it's really, dealing with when artists started, being influenced by the media and the age of information. And so those were just printed on paper and posted all over the city.
Right.
But now they've become everything from the print like you saw in the museum to the benches in Gordy Hall.
Yes, the benches.
The marble benches.
Right.
To LED projections or light projections.
Yes, light projections. Gordy is set up that they can, I suppose they have some sort of a thing archived that they can pull out and play again.
Well, unfortunately, it seems like something has gone awry with
Oh,
this
dear.
older technology now.
Yeah.
So I have not seen it actually playing, but you're right. It is an installation with the
I
LED.
do remember seeing it
Yeah,
playing at
yeah.
one point.
And what's really lovely about that installation is that it's in multiple languages because Gordy is the languages building.
Right,
currently.
yeah. And at one point she had, I think she had one that went around the Times Square,
Yep.
where they have the giant Times building.
Right.
And, you know, it's usually playing things like, you see it on New Year's Eve.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's playing something around the edges.
Right.
And she had something on that one time. Yeah.
And I think I was looking up some information on those before coming over here, and there's something in one of the websites that said that one of her statements is that she wanted people to think about all that baloney they're being fed. So the statements are sometimes contradictory, they're sometimes incendiary, but they definitely make you think.
Yeah. Well, that's the difference between a truism and a pithy statement, I think.
There you go.
But it's really wonderful, and there are a number of books. I noticed that you have one on Navajo weaving there.
I just brought one of the catalogs. Can I hold it up? Yeah. This is a catalog that's on sale in the museum that's from an exhibit that we did called Weaving is Life that focuses on multiple generations of weavers. So it focused on 3 different families. In each family there was at least 3 generations, sometimes 4, of women still actively weaving. So one family included everybody from the 90-plus-year-old grandmother to the granddaughters or great-granddaughters who were like 9 or 12. Yeah.
Really a family affair.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, right.
And weaving traditionally is passed down from woman to woman in the Navajo culture, but there are a lot of men or male weavers now as well.
Well, we haven't mentioned the exhibit really yet that I was talking to you about at the first time when we were talking, namely the museum students exhibit, which is there and which is also going down in mid-September, I believe.
I believe that one is up through September 13th. So yes, we have started at the university a new museum studies certificate program. We have completed 2 years now, and it's set up to where it's for graduates and undergraduates, and it's 2 core courses. The first semester, we're getting ready to start next Monday, is with 15 students, I believe. Is more lecture discussion based, kind of the history of museums, a lot of reading and discussion and activities in class. But then the second semester is a practicum. So the students are charged with putting together an exhibition from concept to installation to programming. And so that's what's still up right now is last spring semester's
Right,
exhibit.
and there are like four sections to it.
Right.
But they're all very interesting and quite different. I mean, for instance, there are a couple of videos there. One shows the mountain gorillas from Africa, you know, and also shows the people looking at the mountain gorillas, because you can do that. And of course, the whole idea of the changes that come across about, because these gorillas have to get used to having people looking at them all the time, you know.
Exactly. So the students were, they were divided into 4 groups, and each group got a primary object to deal with, and then each student had to come up with what we called a secondary object to fit with a big idea. So the big idea where the gorilla video is has to do with external influences causing internal change. And I'm sure you noticed, the exhibits are a combination of art objects, science objects, and history objects.
Right.
So we collaborated with Alden Library again, with the Athens County Historical Society and Museum, and with the Life Sciences research facilities that have collections. So that's been wonderful working with all of those groups as partners. And each group of students, had to make their case for what their big idea was. It was an idea that we came across, my colleague and I, Lisa Quinn, who's our educational programs coordinator, attended a visual literacy conference last year in Toledo. It's the first time we've been to that conference. And one of the presentations I went to was from a faculty member at Johns Hopkins who, they run a museum studies program, and they have an online project that had this same structure where you have groups of students coming together. They have a primary object that has to have an idea that's big enough to accommodate all sorts of different objects and different perspectives, so that each individual student can then contribute that to and it has to then be a cohesive presentation.
Right.
So hopefully those 4 different units seem fairly cohesive.
And one of the other sections has a Nazi flag, which is interesting because it's autographed by American soldiers and was obviously given to the local museum by a local man.
Right, that's a
whose
piece.
name appears on, he's one of the 8 soldiers who autographed it.
Yeah.
Things like that. Very
so that piece is part of their section. Their big idea has to do with the fact that there's essentially 2 sides to every story is the way they start their language on that. And so they were focusing specifically on the symbol, on the swastika symbol. And as you know, that's an ancient symbol that was a very positive symbol until it was used.
Yeah, that's true. The winged cross is very ancient.
And even in our Navajo textiles, we have pieces or designs that look like swastikas. And in the Navajo culture, it's called, or in oral history, it's called a whirling log. And it refers to a story of 2 heroes, I believe, going down a river in a log that gets caught in a what would it be, a whirlpool.
Whirlpool. Have you ever seen the swastikas in the Marietta courthouse?
I haven't.
Of course, it was built in, 1870, kind of like our courthouse. And there are some, in the tile, in the tiles there.
I haven't been in the Marietta courthouse. I'll have to go see
you're
that.
right, All you have to do is walk into the main part of the old courthouse, and you can see them in the tiles. They're not huge quantities, but there are several of them around. And also that particular, I think it's called Weight of Worth or something. That section has President Alden's mortar board.
It does. And that section has gotten a lot of attention lately because it also has
a urinal tile from Hitler's bunker.
Supposedly, a urinal tile from the Wolf's Lair.
The Wolf's Lair.
One of Hitler's
hangouts.
Right. And that piece belongs to the Cornelius Ryan collection from Alden Library.
Yes, the Cornelius Ryan, and it was sent to him by Walter Cronkite.
Right. Yes. So the students were given, the students in that group were given this object with the letter, and they had to come up again with a big idea that they could fit other objects into. So they came up with a great idea having to do with how we assign value.
How you assign value. And there's a beautiful, beautiful wedding dress there. And I don't think I've ever seen anything more beautiful than that dress, which was probably only worn twice.
It was worn by a mother and daughter, I think once in the 30s and once in the 50s.
But that's from the museum.
From the Athens County Historical Museum and Society.
So it's there are such a variety of things in that exhibit. And the different sections, 4 different sections, for the 4 teams that had to come up with the ideas and how to fit them all together and so on.
Right. Yeah, so we definitely encourage people to come by and see that before it closes.
Oh, yes, because it'll be going down September 13th, you said, didn't you?
Right. We leave it up long enough for our incoming class to be able to go in and look at it and critique it if they want to.
So they'll be inspired to do something sort of similar, I guess.
Yeah, I think we're going to structure it very much the same. because it worked out well that the students had a good opportunity to work together, but also be individually responsible for things.
Yeah. Well, one of the interesting things in that first section, too, that has the mountain gorillas, is actually, I guess it's actually an artwork, but it's an ancient ledger book. Looks like a book, and it looks like there are flames on the pages of the book, and it's a sort of a dedication to the Triangle Fire in 1911 when almost 150 women died.
Right, right. So actually, it's a more contemporary piece by her last name is Cummins. I'm not remembering her first name right now. And those books, and that book and others by her, they're called artist books, are housed in special collections in Alden Library. And it is intended to look like the ledger that would have had the inventory of what was lost in that fire. And one of the interesting things about it, or horrible things about it, I guess, but interesting nevertheless, is that along with all the things that were lost, the women are listed, just as if they were. And then, again, that's in the section that talks about outside things causing internal change. It was that fire that led to some changes in labor unions and laws to protect them.
You know, you can't lock the exit doors and so on. You've got to make sure that there is a fire escape and so on.
Well, those were very makeshift kind of factories, I guess, in those buildings and tenements and apartment buildings.
It was a terrible event, but it made a change.
Right.
For the better, goodness knows. So there are quite a few interesting things in there. One of them is also there's another video which shows a cigarette ad, doesn't it? And
it's Kent cigarettes particularly, and that's back in the section, same section as the Nazi flag. So it's still about the two ideas. So they were also working with the concept of light, and because their primary object was a 1930s coal mining helmet.
Yes.
From the Athens County Museum.
With the carbide lamp.
With the carbide lamp. And so the carbide lamp had an open flame, so that notion of, the light that was allowing them to see while they were in the mine, and the more you can see, the more coal you can gather, and the more money you can make, the more you gather, was also a danger, because it could catch fire. So the young man who chose the cigarette video was coming at the idea of technology, advances in technology as light, a metaphor, light as a metaphor in that way. And he was focusing on Kent cigarettes that were advocating that they were better.
Better because of the filter.
Right.
Yes.
Only
it turns out that the filter has poisonous stuff in it.
Yeah, it has asbestos in it. So,
asbestos.
Right.
So.
Exactly. So that's the point with that.
Right. It's just different ways of viewing things. Such interesting things. There were two books, one modern and one ancient, Mary Wollstonecraft, the famous English feminist, who was the mother of Mary Shelley, who wrote Frankenstein.
Exactly, yeah.
And but those old-fashioned S's that looked like F's, and it made.
And I believe the student who selected that, those are two different versions of the same text. I believe it's the first edition and then a later edition.
Right, and I think they showed a different part of the text, if I'm not mistaken, because I thought maybe it would show the same text. But maybe I didn't read it closely enough. I certainly noticed all those strange S's in the 1792 version of Vindication of the Rights of Women.
Right.
And then there's a beautiful Navajo hanging there with butterflies. It's not a sort of a small rug. I guess it was really a wall hanging.
Right. I think it was intended
from the
to be
beginning,
a wall hanging,
but with many beautiful butterflies on it. So. Yes, indeed, people ought to rush right out to Kennedy and make sure they see these different parts. The quilts, which are on the first floor and the second floor.
Correct, yeah.
And be sure to look at the ones on the second floor, too, because they're very nice.
Right.
And then the group of the museum students, which is immediately when you go in to the right, past the restroom and the elevator,
Right.
which takes you to the second floor.
Right.
Just immediately past that are the 4 sections of the museum students.
Right, right.
And then on the other side is the exhibit, which has maps and
Right. That one's called Art as Information, and that one will actually be up
that will
through
be
the
up.
semester until January.
Right.
Right.
So if you want to see the quilts and you want to see the museum students exhibit, you want to go right out there.
Right.
Because it's coming down in early September.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, you know, what I often do is talk about women who have birthdays or things like that at this time. And I was noticing in this book, which I use by Kirsten Holson, Remember the Ladies, they had pictures of 2 actresses from long ago, but people whose names are still well known. And because August 16th was the birthday of Ethel Barrymore, whom I saw, you know, and she was quite an elderly lady, and I had never seen this picture, which I think we can still see, can't we? We took a picture of it there, yes.
Yeah, it's a great picture.
See the fantastic hat she has on and the furs and so forth, and a very young and beautiful Ethel Barrymore of the famous Barrymore acting family. And then there's also a picture of a woman who was famous in the 20s and 30s, and that was Mae West. There she is, and she's got a sophisticated long cigarette holder.
Right.
Right. Nowadays, people are a little less interested in cigarettes than they were when I was young, which is a good thing.
Yeah, yeah.
But anyway, my guest today has been Sally Delgado from Kennedy Museum, who has been there for 20 years.
20 years.
Yeah, she's the old timer on the set. And we've been talking about, remember that it's free to go to Kennedy,
It is.
although they are very glad to receive donations. But it is free to go into Kennedy and see the interesting things which are there, and there will be some new and interesting things, I'm sure, after mid-September. But if you want to see those great quilts,
Right.
you want to go now, and also the museum students' exhibits with the urinal tile and the Nazi flag and the dress.
Right.
And there's another dress there made of paper.
Leslie Dill's poem,
Isn't that
Wedding
something?
Dress. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
a so-called wedding dress
Yeah.
made of paper, Hindi paper from India.
Right.
So
And she incorporates Emily Dickinson
Yeah.
poetry, so that's a really beautiful piece. Don't wanna miss
fantastic
that, yeah.
things in that exhibit. So
Yeah.
don't miss it. Go right out to Kennedy, and the hours are
We are open Monday through Friday, 10 to 5, till 8 on Thursday.
10 to
10
5
8,
until 8 on Thursday.
and then 1 to 5 Saturday and Sunday.
1 to 5 Saturday and Sunday.
Yeah.
So do come out and see Kennedy Museum up at the Ridges in the former Mental Health Center.
Yeah.
This is Lois Whaley for Women Today and Yesterday, and Sally Delgado. Thank you so much for being my guest today.
Thank you for inviting me.